I get asked how I keep my gouache illustrations looking bright and vibrant and not muddy, so I'm going to tell you 5 things that I do to keep my paintings and illustrations looking crisp and bright, and none of the tips have to do with using bright colours. I'll be showing you as I paint some flower illustrations that I'm creating for a new collection of prints, which is really exciting. So let's jump right into it, and the first tip is don't use black paint. It's really normal to gravitate to black paint to create shadows and darker areas in your paintings and illustrations, but I've always found that for the colours and vibrancy that I want to achieve, that using black to darken my colours creates a dull effect, and it often contaminates my other colours on the palette too, which leaves me with a muddy palette and a kind of dull undertone to my paintings. So how do I darken colours and create shadows? I use blue, more specifically Prussian blue, and this retains a vibrancy in my colours while creating darker hues to paint the shadows. It's really normal to think that shadows are all grey in tone. It's the way we simplify images, what's in shadow is darker, and so seeing it as black or grey is normal and can be true. But if we look closer, we can see that the parts where the object or image is darker because the light isn't hitting it directly don't tend to just be one monotone of grey, and actually you can find a range of colours that if you were able to isolate them, you'd see they're not grey at all. For example, these cherry blossoms that I'm painting, the parts that are not being directly hit by light have a range of different pinkish hues, and I don't strive to achieve the same exact tones from my inspiration or reference photos, but I do try and achieve the same range of values, like how light or dark the colours are. Like for example, I went a little bit more blue toned in my shadows instead of going more pink toned like the reference that I showed you. I knew I wanted to achieve this bright white highlight in these cherry blossoms and for it to really jump out, but to retain that pinkish hue of the blossom, if I had mixed in black paint, it would have really dulled everything. So mixing a more purplish hue for the shadow with Prussian blue really helps to retain the overall vibrancy of the flower. Now initially I went a bit too dark with this and I realized the contrast was too stark, so I did have to adjust, which is really normal with gouache. It's always good to remember that gouache, the dark colors dry lighter, so I did wait for it to dry before I decided I needed to go a bit lighter. But that's the beauty with gouache, you can layer and mix on the paper, so it's easy to fix certain mistakes. You can see how the shadows and darker areas of the petal is created with this kind of purplish, pinkish lilac hue, which still gives the illusion of depth and shadow, but without pulling towards grey or black. My second tip is to clean out your palette between sections on a painting. Because gouache reactivates with water, it means that unlike other paints, you actually can't keep mixing on top of your dried out paint on the palette because it will reactivate and mix with your fresh paint, and then your colours will muddy and cross-contaminate. I used to do this all the time, and I would find that my crisp colours would get duller as I went along in the painting. So if you're painting something that requires different colours, it's best to clean out your palette completely and start afresh so you don't have the colours dull and muddy. This brings me to my third tip, which is to create contrast in your illustrations. Contrast between values, so how light or dark a colour is, is what helps create dimension, and it will help your illustrations and paintings look really vibrant. It's really important to remember that colours can look different depending on the surrounding colours. So you can up the vibrancy of a colour by choosing the colours it's in relationship with in the surrounding areas. It can be so hard to paint things that are white. It's overwhelming to look at a reference photo and register a whole thing that is white but not be able to pick out how much variation there is within the white of that picture or of that object. But if you take your time to look closely and break down your reference, you'll be able to see a clear range of shades within that one object. When I was first learning, and in the initial years of my journey with painting, I liked to use something like Procreate or Photoshop to use the color picker tool, where you can go in and pick out colors in your reference and really understand what the colors are in isolation. So I really recommend doing that if you're trying to learn this process of seeing different colors in an object. So the petals of this flower look white and crisp because I created enough contrast with the shadow, and it's only by creating this shadow that we can truly see the vibrancy of the white petals. If you've gotten to a point where you are layering and layering white paint but you feel like it doesn't look white enough, it's because your surrounding areas aren't contrasted enough with the white, so you're not getting that brightness that you're looking for. It's the contrast that really helps us register that the petals are bright white and being hit by light. And I often like to start with a mid-tone when I'm painting. So you saw at the beginning I began with the shadow. My personal preference is to start by painting more mid-tones and shadows and then building on the highlights on top of that. And I think this segues perfectly to my fourth tip, which is to layer your paint. At least with gouache, that's how I do it. It's really hard to select the perfect colour off the bat to paint, but it's a lot easier to get the colours you want by layering, getting there through a process that builds to the perfect shades that work together. My first layer doesn't often start with the perfect colour. I often call my first layer the mapping layer because it's where I put the general colours that I'm going to be using. It gives me something to go off of. From there I can begin my process of building up lighter and darker shades and adjusting as I go along. Gouache allows me to build layers really well because it dries quickly and has this matte texture that I find perfect for layering. As I put down the colours and see how they work on the page, I observe if I need to go lighter or darker and adjust from there. And darker colours dry lighter, light colours dry darker. So with gouache, it's a process that requires patience too, to see how the colours will turn out. But I quite enjoy this process. I think I referenced it earlier where I said it's like the dance with gouache, or at least I say this all the time. It's a dance, it's a process. You put down a colour, then you adjust from there. Because of this, it's hard to give a prescribed step-by-step when painting with gouache, because if I told you to mix the perfect colour, you still probably wouldn't recreate the exact same colour that I'm doing, and vice versa. So it's important to learn more about the process and how the paint behaves and how to assess what you need versus getting caught up mixing the perfect colours. And that's why I always say, don't stress about creating the exact same colour as I am or what you're seeing on the reference. Focus on getting the range of values, how light and dark a colour is instead. This will help you achieve a better outcome. And my final tip to retain vibrancy and not have your colours muddy is build from thin to thick layers when you're layering your gouache paint, and make sure your first layer is fully dry. Gouache reactivates, which I think is one of its main frustrations that everyone has with traditional gouache at least. For the colours to retain that vibrancy and not blend into each other and turn into a soupy mess, you're going to want to layer from thin to thick. It's important to note that thin paint is more translucent and a bit more watery. However, keeping water control is super important. You don't want your first layer to be super runny and wet because it will take too long to dry, and it will also dampen your paper too much, which will then affect the following layers and probably warp your paper too. As you build the next layer of paint, make sure the paint is a little less diluted and keep increasing this until your last layer is your thickest layer. This will help you with not disturbing the layers underneath. My main advice with this tip is really to allow each layer to dry. It will test your patience, but it will allow you to get the best results, at least as you begin or in your beginning stages of your gouache journey. Once you become more familiar with how the paint behaves, you will find it less necessary to wait until it's fully dry every time, because you'll understand how it works and you'll know how it's going to behave, so you can adjust. But as you learn, it's probably best to let every single layer to fully dry. That way you build on top and you're gonna minimize the muddying, minimize the soupy mess, minimize all the colors running into each other, which will allow you to keep that crispness and that bold and vibrant result that you really want with gouache. I hope these tips were useful, but please do let me know if you have any questions. I'm currently working on creating a collection of prints with my flower pieces, and these illustrations that you see here are part of that collection. These particular flowers in this piece are linked to hope and new beginnings, which I find so uplifting. Anyway, I will see you in my next video, and I hope you have a good one. Bye!